Recently, I was informed of a hit piece that's being put out on February 1st by an LDS church employee named Christopher Blythe, who teaches at Brigham Young University. Of course, there would be a hit piece from an employee of the church.
Really hard for me because I don't hold him, I hold him accountable, but it's kind of with a heavy heart.
My friends, I have been so excited to kick off this show. It has been long awaited. You may know me. I'm Christopher James Blythe. I am a professor of folklore and mythology at Brigham Young University. I'm also the co-host of Angels and Seer Stones, the premier Latter-day Saint folklore podcast. This is a sister podcast. I do Angels and Seer Stones with Christine, my wonderful wife and fellow folklorist. And this podcast is for my unique interests. We're going to talk about esotericism. We're going to talk about non-Latter-day Saint new religious movements, what some channels might call sensationally cults. We're going to talk about the myths that define our societies and our ancient cultures. And we're definitely going to be spending a lot of time talking about the esoteric within the Latter-day Saint tradition. Every episode represents a book, a document, or a story. This is my research. I am a very productive researcher. I'm a good, productive writer, but I have built up stacks and stacks of materials that I've collected since I was 16 years old on different Latter-day Saint traditions, on correspondence with different prophets even, and a lot of sub-interests that don't represent the material that I put out in the world in a book like Terrible Revolution or next year's Emma Hale Smith, A Folk Biography. I have official work I do, and this channel is for the other stuff, the stuff that gets me really excited, but unfortunately I can't justify spending time writing articles about. I love the title Lost Library. It was recommended by Cardinal of Ward Radio. And I thought at first, oh, that's kind of silly, Dr. Blythe's Lost Library. But he said, no, people are going to remember that name, and it represents the sort of things you do. So we're going to go with it. And I like it because a lot of things I study are represented by a lost library. In fact, the Latter-day Saint tradition itself is based in a lost library. The collection of materials that Mormon and Moroni worked from to produce the Book of Mormon, the plates that were hidden, and the hope that more sacred records will be revealed. It's a lost library because lost implies esoteric, implies mystery, things I'm most interested in. I once had a dream in which a woman brought me an old diary, a message left by a strange early Latter-day Saint man by the name of Benjamin F. Johnson. I always think, what a weird, memorable dream of someone handing me a lost document. I like that sort of stuff. Today, we're talking about the Sacred Records app that has just come out a few months ago. It is our first document. Sacred Records app professes to be a collection of indigenous writings that testify of the Book of Mormon. It is a fascinating story about how these came to be. So we're actually going to spend a few episodes diving into this and diving into the larger Amerindian history of alternative theological and alternative histories that have been promoted at different times within the Latter-day Saint tradition. Why is it that Latter-day Saints would be so interested by an app that provides no attention, no details to where the materials really are coming from. It's similar to the Book of Mormon, but the Book of Mormon professed to specifically come from gold plates. They had witnesses. There was a person who described himself openly as the translator. This is so different than that. It's not so different than other Latter-day Saint apocryphal works that have been published across time, such as sacred scriptures that Mike Rigby put together and featured the first materials from Christopher Nemelka. But today we're diving into this, and we're starting off with an interview with Sherry Cardinal. Now, Sherry Cardinal was the right-hand woman of a man named David Taylor. And her story is about her experience becoming acquainted with David Taylor and then eventually being appointed as chief grandmother of David's clan. You might know David Taylor. Online, he gained a lot of popularity about 2 years ago under the name Chief Midegah.
My foreign name, I consider it a foreign name, is David Taylor Barker, and my name that I might know my creator knows me by is the kind man of the Ojibwe peoples.
Podcast after podcast began to platform Chief Midegah or David Taylor.
Chief David Midegah has got a lot of passion for his people and some very interesting information about his traditions and their correlation with the Book of Mormon.
Chief David Midegah has joined us.
Special guest, Chief Midegah.
What are David's claims? Well, at this point, David claims to be the one mighty and strong, the great leader who's going to unite various factions of the Latter-day Saint tradition, as well as native peoples, in fact, as well as the world's religions, I presume. He believes he is going to build the last days temple in Independence, Missouri. He is going to usher in the second coming of Jesus Christ. That is what the claim of building the last days temple is. He's something of a messianic figure. That's not where this began. Where this began, David Taylor was a man who professed to have an artifact. Here was an item that David claimed had been passed down for generations. It was a scroll in the tradition of the Midegah, in which ritual scrolls used as mnemonic devices to remember how a story, a myth, should be explained in a ritual context. Now, let's talk about Sherry. I want you to hear her story and the way she tells it.
Importantly, you're not a Latter-day Saint.
No.
And so your connection with the Latter-day Saint world is your connection to David Taylor here. But tell me about your upbringing. Who is Sherry Cardinal?
That's a long story. Try to make it short. I'm known professionally as a critical incident stress management traumatic expert in traumatic stress. I did that for years, working with first responders, police. I worked for a sheriff's department for 12 years. These are all my earthly credentials.
Sherry had an unusual upbringing. She was adopted by a Swedish family, a settler family, in Lewiston, New York. She believes she started out as part of the 1950s or 1960s scoop in which indigenous children were rehomed in settler families from Canada. And she found herself in a family living only a few miles from the Tuscarora Reservation, Tuscarora Nation located near Lewiston, New York, where her father served as a Baptist minister. She didn't know that she had Native American roots until much later, but when she was around 14, she felt a great affinity towards Native culture and began to study it. She felt drawn to it.
I would listen to Chief Green and what they were going through and their history and their tribal customs. And the same with Wallace Mad Bear Anderson, although to a lesser degree. I didn't have as much contact with him. Those are men that I spent a lot of my teenage years listening to, and they were huge activists when the government was trying to take over the Tuscarora land for the Niagara Power Project. And of course they were successful, but Chief Green was, I think, the thorn in their side. He would go to Washington and speak up, and he would come back and hold talks and concerns, and I would listen. Mad Bear Anderson was more of an activist. The Jay Treaty, which is another subject about how indigenous can cross the non-existent border between the U.S. and Canada, and I became part of that. But I was so young. I was 13, 14 when all this was going on, and my parents my adoptive parents kind of held me back about things. But I was paying attention when I went to my first powwow with Chief Green and his family. And the rest is history.
Sherry was 7 years old when her family told her she was adopted.
When they told me, I felt totally disconnected. Because all of a sudden, what I had been told wasn't true. And when I could ask clearly enough what was true, I was chastised and blamed for upsetting my adoptive mother. So I shut up for many years growing up. And I just felt totally disconnected from everybody. The only thing that made me feel connected, and this is weird, is when we were with Chief Green and his family. I resonated with what he was saying, resonated with what Mad Bear Anderson said, resonated with what they were trying to do. And I kind of became I call it a closet Indian activist. I wasn't trying to be anything. I listened and learned to those things that resonated within me.
Sherry resonated with Native culture. She didn't know who her birth parents were. It wasn't until the year 2000 when Sherry, at 50 years old, took a DNA test and was surprised to find only European markers. But her search for her heritage didn't end there. She would locate her birth parents, and while her father had passed, she immersed herself in her French-Canadian ancestry, discovering many indigenous connections.
You know, the thing is, oh, maybe you're pretendian. Well, I don't know, because I had a lot of indigenous spiritual experiences, which kept me kind of on track. Pretendian is a white person trying to be an Indian. There's lots of those. But also, there's lots of white people with some indigenous heritage that blood quantum doesn't matter. Blood quantum is genocide.
One thing is certain, Sherry's experience with Native peoples in her childhood continued to influence her throughout her life. This all led to something that happened in her early 30s when she went on what she calls a vision quest.
When I was in Colorado, just outside of Rocky Mountain National Park at a campsite, and the only thing between me and Rocky Mountain National Park was an old split wood fence. And I would, at my campsite at night, play the flute, and the elk would come up. And I didn't know it at the time, but the elk is part of my dudum, the deer clan. And I was, every time I'd play the flute, no matter where I was in Colorado or New Mexico, the elk would always show up. So whatever it was I was playing on the flute was obvious something that they connected to. Okay, so this one night, and I was there searching. It was a time for me when I was up there trying desperately to find out about where I was supposed to be, where I was supposed to go, all these identity questions. I had no way to connect it, but I knew it was important. I'd gone to sleep in my tent that one night, and it was kind of like I told you about last night. Sometimes in the middle of the night, especially 2, 3 o'clock, I wake up like I had never been asleep, and something comes to me very clearly. And I consider those moments, promptings. Pay attention here. There's something you need to know or do or think. And this particular night, I sat straight up and I heard, clear as I'm talking to you, 1 is the highest number. And I'm like, well, that's a mind bender. 1 is the highest number. What does that mean? And it was like, you'll find out, just keep that in mind. There was a reassurance that that's what I came there to learn. So I took that under advisement. There was nobody there. There was nobody talking to me. I was there by myself. Clear voice, clear as day. So I took that as my vision. So since then, trying to figure out what that means, and I've realized since that it's all about unity. We talk in numbers, like there's 25 different ethnic groups. God doesn't see it that way. He sees that there's only one humanity. And there's 400 religions in the world, but God doesn't see it that way. When I use the term God, for me it's Manadu. There's only one humanity and one faith and one spirit. And so I've spent my entire life since then trying to put all that together and teach that. In fact, when I came down from that vision quest, I went down to Colorado Springs, and I had previously been to the Air Force Academy there with a mentor of mine who was a Air Force colonel. But I loved the chapel there. The chapel there, I don't know if you've ever been there. It is so inspirational, and you just have to see it. And so it was a Sunday morning, and I thought, I just need to go and put this whole thing, pray about this whole thing. So I went into the chapel, and they were having a service, and the service happened to be a kind of modern day service with drums and guitars, and there was a whole lot of different Air Force cadets there of every color and shape and size. So I'm there sitting in the back seat. Now, I was dressed in skins. I'd been up on the mountain for a week, probably not really smelling the best, and I'm dressed in buckskins. And I'm just trying to be anonymous. I was just trying to figure shit out, basically. And the pastor, which he probably regrets now, asked if there was anybody that had anything that they wanted to share. You know, those kinds of services. And I'm like, nope, not me. I'm trying to hide here in the pew. And a few people got up and said some things, and that was good.
I had a lot of Cherokee
But
teachers.
I kept getting kicked in the ass saying, get up, get up.
Alabama
You know how
Coshada,
those things happen.
Some,
You just,
Alabama Coshada teacher.
okay. So I finally get up in front of the whole congregation.
Belonged to the Cherokee
of these
Cultural
Air Force
Society.
cadets,
Did a lot of work.
dressed in skins, hair braided,
in Houston,
looking
and
like
Oklahoma.
some Yahoo out of some
It was
Western
my job.
movie, I'm sure.
One time I had
And I get up
horses
there
and
and tell them
carriages and
about
things.
the Vision Quest.
The deputy
And that
principal
one
chief
is
of
the
the
highest
Cherokee
number.
Nation was coming down to our
And everybody
annual
kind of got quiet. And I looked at this cadet that was
Trail of
black.
Tears
And I said, I don't see your blackness, I see
memorial.
your spirit.
It
And that's
was
very
2 days of
indigenous.
gathering
Anin,
and,
right, means I see your spirit. When we
teaching
greet
about
people,
the
we
Trail of
greet
Tears.
people by their
It was my
spirit
job
first,
to take
not
Joe
by what's on
Grayson
the
around in my
outside.
carriage. So I got to
And
learn a lot from
I
the
tried to
deputy
explain
principal chief of the
what
Cherokee
one is
Nation.
the highest number means, that we're all one people, that the surface differences didn't matter, and we needed to treat each other, Anin, greet each other in the spirit.
From that time in Colorado, Sherry had a number of experiences participating in indigenous causes with indigenous people.
Looking for teachers. I had a lot of Cherokee teachers. I had a Alabama Coshada teacher. So I belonged to the Cherokee Cultural Society, did a lot of work with the Cherokees in Houston and Oklahoma. It was my job. One time I had horses and carriages and things. And, the deputy principal chief of the Cherokee Nation was coming down to our annual Trail of Tears memorial. It was 2 days of gathering and teaching about the Trail of Tears. And it was my job to take Joe Grayson around in my carriage. So I got to learn a lot from the deputy principal chief of the Cherokee Nation.
Sherry believed so deeply she was indigenous, but there was no evidence, not in her DNA, not in her birth mother or father's identities. If she was going to find indigenous roots, she would have to find them in genealogy.
To tie all this into why I'm here today is it's genealogy that brought me and David Taylor together on a website called genie.com.
Putting your family history together can be quite a process. Research, gathering records, interviewing your
Genie.com
family
was
to get
part
the
of the
story
first
right can take up all
generation
your
of
nights and
internet
weekends.
genealogical
You'll probably end up with
sites
some document that
where
resembles the
extended
ultimate
family
flowchart of
members
the
could
Dead Sea
collaborate
Scrolls
on their
that might sit in
research
the
from
attic for the next
afar.
40 years. The problem with researching family history is that it's usually one person doing all the work. The crazy thing is, if we could get all of our relatives in one place to help, we'd be finished in no time. That is, if Aunt Martha left her 9 cats at home. But what if there was a safe place where you could see, collaborate, and build on what you already know? So check out Genie.com. Type in your name and add a parent, spouse, sibling, or kid. It's that easy. From there, stand back and watch the tree grow, because everyone you invite can contribute. Genie will match your tree with others that overlap. Hey, and pretty soon you'll have a tree that tells you where you came from, who you're related to. And since it's online, instead of in an attic, you'll be able to share it with your whole family, even Aunt Martha. Start a tree, invite your family, watch your history grow. Genie.com.
I was filling in my blanks from my father's side of the family. My mother's side of the family I had done on Ancestry.com. I wasn't finding that much about the Bouviers on Ancestry.com, so you start using different websites because they have different information. And I found on Genie I had a lot more connections. And what started happening is my indigenous connections started crossing with David Taylor's indigenous connections. And I started seeing his name cropping up. And we had similar names in our distant family tree. And I'm like, so who is this David Taylor guy? So I wrote to him on Genie saying he was looking for people in his genealogy as well. So I wrote to him saying, well, I'm a Bouvier. And so we connected on that level. Very sparingly at first, you know. It was just like, oh, wow, okay, I found an indigenous living relative. They're not all dead. Found lots of dead ones. And because of our lineages, I have some amazing connections to the Ojibwe chiefs and Métis chiefs of, you know, the 17 and 1800s. So that's how I met David.
And I think I've sent you some things lately about what I call my indigenous ancestral relations. And all of them intertwine with David Taylor. His grandmother is my cousin, indigenously. And indigenous, we don't delineate between first cousins and 10th cousins. We're all cousins. It's kind of the joke on the res. We call everybody cousin because if you go back, anybody that has indigenous history is probably cousin to somebody else. It was a small gene pool, you know, and I go back to several hundred.
So who was David Taylor? He was born the son of J. Barker, who David has acknowledged spent the majority of his son's life in prison.
J. Barker, now identified as a suspect in a Friday afternoon bank robbery.
Jay's mother, who was David's grandmother, Patricia Rose LaFontaine, was a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and had ties to its reservation in North Dakota. Yet she emphasized her own descent through the Red Bear Pembina Band. An intertribal feud about land rights had led Patty to see herself as an outsider at Turtle Mountain. On February 10, 2018, Patty was said to have recognized her grandson as a headman of the Ojibwe Anishinaabe Adik Sungab Dudum, that is to say, a chief in their family clan. Yet David was never recognized as a member of the official Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, the group that had been granted federal recognition. The requirement for membership within Turtle Mountain is 1/4 blood quantum. From what I've been able to gather, David is only 1/8. I should also point out that Michael LaFontaine, a Latter-day Saint and Turtle Mountain Tribe member, has had major issues with Chief Midegah's claim. He argues that to claim the status of a chief means to represent people, not just a hereditary lineage, and more importantly, David has claimed recognition within that tribe. In time, Sherry and David would meet.
I found he took a job in Massachusetts. He was living in Germany and Lord knows where else. He's kind of a nomad. But he has young sons in Germany, so he was living in Germany part of the time, if not a lot of the time, which turns out to be very important. But he took a job in Massachusetts, and he was coming to Massachusetts. And me being from Massachusetts, it was over the holidays. I was coming up to Massachusetts. At the time, I was living in Texas. And I came up to Massachusetts for the holidays, and we met. And so we spent quite a bit of time together. I was staying at my cousin's house. He was staying in a hotel that was given to him by his new employers. So we met in Massachusetts, and he ended up staying at my cousin's house a lot of the time because he didn't want to go back to a empty hotel room. And my cousin's house was always kind of Grand Central Station. She had lots of friends and visitors all the time. So what I noticed was what I called he would hold court. He has a mesmerizing kind of way about it, you know, and he would be telling stories and this and that. And people would be fascinated, including me, because I didn't know him. And so we got to know each other there in Massachusetts. I brought him up to Maine to visit my family up here. And I think we stayed overnight one day and then went back to Massachusetts. You know, everybody was kind of copacetic. He's very charming. So that's how we met. And we stayed in touch. And he was very good about teaching me more about tribal stuff, especially now that I knew who my tribe was, which I didn't always know. So he filled in a lot of blanks, of which I am still very grateful.
From the time David had been appointed chief in 2018, he had begun an effort to establish federal recognition of the Red Bear Pembina and to ensure his family was given their financial and property rights. Before meeting Sherry Cardinal, David Taylor was focused on unity among Native American peoples, but a kind of unity that would make some people uncomfortable. David ran an organization called the Turtle Island Tribal Nation, which would reportedly give status and allegedly federal status to those that had only 1% native DNA. This raised controversy online. But from Sherry's perspective, this was a good thing. Remember, for someone like her that believed that she had an indigenous lineage, this was an answer to prayers, someone that would recognize her. On September 13th, 2022, David Taylor wrote Sherry Cardinal an official letter recognizing her place in his tribe. The relevant portion read, "Additionally, you are officially recognized as a member of the Grand Council of the Red Bear Band of the Pembina Chippewa tribe, of which you belong." On January 7th, 2024, David Taylor officially appointed Sherry Cardinal as the chief grandmother of his clan. This was everything Sherry had spent her life preparing for, formally honored and recognized as a Native matriarch. I am honored to officially recognize you as a leader in our Anishinaabe community. Your accumulated wisdom and life experiences will serve as a guiding force, mentoring individuals and contributing to the community's well-being. As a keeper of healing knowledge, you will play a pivotal role in preserving our cultural heritage by returning to self-healing. Your involvement in spiritual leadership, community decision-making, and educational initiatives will further strengthen the fabric of Anishinaabe life. In closing, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for your unwavering leadership and commitment to our people. May the strength of our familial ties and the wisdom passed down by our ancestors guide us as we continue to walk the sacred path together. Our familial ties. Miigwech, which means thank you for your enduring dedication, and may the spirits bless our journey ahead. Sherry, you are like a mother to me, and it is a great honor to have you in my life and in a position of influence within our clan and greater tribal nation. Wishing you peace and understanding. David Taylor Barker, Midegah Ogichida.
And in the beginning, especially about the first year and a half, it wasn't like this. Midegah was more subdued. He was more focused on the connection between the indigenous and the Jewish, and uniting the tribes of the indigenous, which was right in my wheelhouse. But it was all about uniting. So as long as it focused on uniting, I was in.
The key event in this early period was a tribal delegation that Sherry and David led to the Chabad in New York City.
To New York City to meet with the Jewish sages. That was a very good trip.
I would like to introduce myself. Yossi Shulman. I'm from northeast Pennsylvania, a little town called Kingston, near Scranton there. But sometimes you can be in a small town, and today with a very connected world, we can all be together, and we'll meet up at some point. But it's an honor to be.
And we were the first people, the Anishinaabe, those spirit lowered to the earth is what we call ourselves. The first ones to come into North America following the flood. This is our story. We follow 7 grandfather teachings. It is the core of who we are, called Midday we win, the path of the heart, or kindness.
What exactly are we dealing with here? Who did David Taylor and Sherry Cardinal visit? For answers, I asked my friend and Jewish studies expert, Dr. Trevin Hatch.
Chabad Lubavitch is a Hasidic movement within Orthodox Judaism, and it was founded in 1775 in Belarus, which was then the Russian Empire. But due to severe persecution, the movement relocated to the United States after World War II and settled in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Chabad's population is roughly 95,000, which is only about 13% of the global Hasidic population and less than 1% of the roughly 15 million Jews. In the 1950s, the group began a very intense outreach campaign to Jews, to largely non-observant Jews. And these initiatives led to 6,500 emissaries being sent to over 100 countries. And this established thousands of Chabad houses that served as places of worship, or places where Jews could receive free religious services and education and Torah study. And the group, that when they go out to seek for non-observant Jews, what they're doing is trying to help them become more observant. And they emphasize lighting Shabbat candles and praying with tefillin and studying the Torah. Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson was the 7th of the last Rebbe who led Chabad since the 1950s, and he passed away in 1994. This led to very robust messianic debates and beliefs among its followers, many of whom believed that Menachem was the Messiah, and that he would come and return as the Messiah. A few years ago, David Taylor visited the tomb of the Rebbe in Queens, New York, and this is a very prominent place, a pilgrimage site for Jews all around the world, and they come to visit the Rebbe, and they write messages on papers and put them on the tomb, and they fully believe that the Rebbe will receive these messages. And this is a very sacred experience for them to connect with their spiritual leader, even though he's been dead for over 30 years.
Sherry loved her experience going with David Taylor to visit a Jewish community in New York City.
And when we did the documentary, We Will Do with the Jewish rabbis, that was probably one of the most important things I felt I had done in my life.
David made a great deal of this meeting.
Next 2 years, a lot happened. David's outreach expanded to work with a variety of independent native spiritual practitioners. The Eighth Fire Lodge, run by Wendy Phillips, Bill Lane, a Mayan group based out of the Yucatan, and others. But David was also discovered by Latter-day Saints. That is Brian Nettles, who ran a YouTube channel, Book of Mormon Heartland, and soon outreach to Latter-day Saints became a main part of David's ministry. David was himself a non-practicing Latter-day Saint at the time, now armed with a message he wanted them to hear and things he wanted them to do. David would soon become a Latter-day Saint YouTube celebrity. Sherry accompanied David to multiple conferences and retreats, yet she was never interested in the Latter-day Saint faith herself. She merely sought to impart her ideas based in Native American spirituality. Yet as time passed, she came to believe David was changing, and she was becoming a less key figure in his mission.
When he started doing podcasts with Zion Media and a bunch of other people, and get into these fits of anger with people, and I would try to talk to him, and he has this public persona, or had this public persona of being the kind warrior man. He comes across as very gentle, considerate person. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that behind the scenes was Mr. Hyde. Very angry. I hate people. He never turned it towards me initially. But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, two different personalities. And I started noticing this more and more, especially in regards to women. I'm a bit of a seer. I see things behind the scenes. I would kind of poke Midegah and say, hey, you know, I have owl medicine, which means I can see through the dark. And I can see hidden things that people don't want me to see. And I started confronting him about these shadowy women around him. I didn't know what was going on. He'll deny all of that this never happened, until I started getting proof. That's when the tables turned. They started turning when we were in the Yucatan, because for some reason I wasn't allowed back on the ceremonial grounds when he was being raised up as chief. And I thought this was really weird, because I'm the chief grandmother.
Sherry had seen red flags before her trip to the Yucatan, but it was an experience she had there that would reorient the way she felt about the current direction of the movement led by David Taylor.
When I was in that ceremonial grounds, I saw jaguars. 2 of them in the trees. As real as I'm talking to you. But they weren't there, of course. I was the only one that saw them. But I asked Adriana and Choo-Choo, what is this jaguar? I didn't know. And I described them. And they kind of looked at me and looked at each other and said, you know, you will know, you will find out. They're all very, we aren't telling you shit thing. That's kind of the indigenous way. If you had a vision, that vision will fulfill itself with you. And so I got that. And from then on, that whole weekend, and from then on, I saw through everything that was happening. And it turns out the jaguars are that medicine. They're truth tellers. You'll see through all the deception. And they come in two colors, white and black. And the deception part is black. And then once you get through the deception, you see the white jaguars. And that has happened to me. And it was all through this time from last March until now that all of this keeps being revealed. Now, you might think I'm a delusional, crazy old woman, but that's how it happened for me.
This would ultimately culminate in a passionate voicemail that she sent to David Taylor in April of 2025. In April of 2025, Sherry sent a voice memo to David. Maybe it's a WhatsApp. And in it, she says goodbye. This is wild.
Yes, I know exactly what I've done. Especially now that I'm coming out of this brain fog, this drug-induced brain fog, and I have clarity. So what I've done is at once exposed and thwarted your narcissistic needs and not going along with your narrative and daring to question your motives. That's not something you can tolerate. I understand that. I know I've been the wind underneath your wings so that you can fly where you're flying, and I gladly release you to fly with Adriana and Mima. Because right now the cost for me is too high. I cannot bear it. It is costing me my health. So I want you to know that I don't love you any less. That's real. But right now I have to love myself more and just take care of me. I love you. Bye-bye.
In our next installment, you're going to have the opportunity to hear Sherry's story from going from someone who had complete and implicit trust in the man David Taylor to question him on financial issues, impropriety with women. And she eventually came to question whether that birch bark scroll was actually